Hi, Acadiana. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Welcome to season 2 of Let's Talk Tropics, the 2025 hurricane season, of course, starting on Sunday, June the 1st. Today's June the 2nd, and so far so good. We don't have anything to worry about out in the Atlantic Basin, but we're going to talk about how we do some tropical forecasting, maybe a little bit about what models we will use, and going to talk a little bit more about important safety tips so that you can be ready for hurricane season as we go through the year. But it is a really nice day across Acadiana today. Partly cloudy skies, temperatures hovering at 87 degrees. It feels like 90 though, as those dew points are climbing back into the lower 70s. Humidity now at 56%. Winds out of the east-northeast at 3 and the pressure holding at 30.01. And as you can see, there's tons of sunshine out there, very bright, and with that humidity level starting to increase, it's going to be a little more uncomfortable going through the rest of the week here compared to what we saw over the course of the weekend, where it was actually quite pleasant. So as far as any rain, the rains we're seeing are over Florida. That's the old frontal boundary that came through that actually brought us the pleasant weather over the course of the weekend. We did have a few widely scattered showers over the coast of Texas early this morning, but a lot of that is dissipated. But you can still see we've got a frontal boundary that's out here over the Gulf waters. And generally this time of the year, that's what you kind of want to watch out for when it comes to tropical development, especially here across the Gulf, the western part of the Atlantic, and then down here in the far western part of the Caribbean. Whenever you get a front to get down here and kind of settle in, occasionally you can get low pressure to develop. But that's not the case in this particular instance. So at this point, we don't have any tropical waves or anything to worry about that's anywhere close to home. And if you are going to be doing some boating, it's really a pretty nice day out there. Those winds are going to be light out of the southeast at about 5 to 10 knots. And seas running about 1 to 2 feet. So a complete look at the Gulf waters here. Again, you see a lot of shower and thunderstorm activity here right off the coast of Florida. Again, this is a frontal boundary, and sometimes during the month of June, when these frontal boundaries do push off the Gulf Coast and kind of settle out there, occasionally you can get a low pressure area to develop. So something that we'll watch, but we're not really that concerned about this particular front, as we do think it's going to go ahead and wash out here over the next couple of days. So let's move on to the Caribbean and Central America. Everything looking fine. We've got some showers there on the eastern coast of Nicaragua. We've got a bit of a low pressure area that's kind of working its way westward into the Pacific. And in fact, that particular area might have a chance for some tropical development, but this is going to be out over the Pacific side, just like we saw Alvin earlier in the weekend. That's now dissipated. But remember, Pacific hurricane season starts on May the 15th. So having tropical systems at this time really isn't that unusual. And as far as the Caribbean, one thing you're probably going to notice is there is some Saharan dust that's down there. You see that kind of a darker brown, kind of grayish look. It's not that deep blue that you would normally see on the satellite out of the Caribbean. So there is a lot of Saharan dust that's moving across the Atlantic Ocean. And that's one of the things that early season tropical systems do struggle with. When you got that Saharan dust out there, it makes it a lot harder for any tropical weather to develop. But you got some nice trade winds that are kind of drifting here off toward the west. And as I said, we're not expecting any tropical development there over the Caribbean. We will watch this particular area here that is blowing up with some thunderstorms east of the Bahamas. That is also the tail end of a frontal boundary that's moved out into the middle part of the Atlantic Ocean. And at this point, it doesn't look like we're going to see any tropical development there. So in good shape near the Bahamas. Looking much farther out into the Atlantic Ocean, a lot of times we don't really pay a whole lot of attention to what's going on out here until we start to get into the middle part of the hurricane season. But I do want to remind you, last year we had Beryl that developed right about in that area and became our first Category 5 hurricane there right at the beginning of July. It was the earliest Category 5 hurricane on record. So normally this is the part of the area that doesn't seem to get going until we get into the latter part of July or even really into August, as you start to see those tropical waves kind of coming off of the African coast and working their way off toward the west. But at this point, we're not seeing anything out there, so not anything to be concerned about. Just a little tropical wave right there. But that's not showing any signs of any development, nor do we expect to, and the models really aren't showing a whole lot there either. So from the National Hurricane Center, officially, there are no tropical systems expected here over the next 7 days. We will get another update on the 7-day graphic tropical outlook here in about maybe 30 or 40 minutes or so, but I don't expect that to change at all. We've also got the Global Tropics Hazard Outlook. So if you want to look out a little bit farther, really if you're within 7 days, it's a lot easier to forecast tropical weather. And I know the models go out 14, 16 days in some cases, and you've probably already seen some stuff being shared on social media, but one model showing some tropical development and other models not showing. When you don't have that agreement like that, you're really not going to expect anything to develop. But going into week 2, and again, this particular graphic updates late Wednesday, early Thursday. So we're going to get a new update on this on Thursday. But you can see that week valid June 11th through the 17th. You got a little bit of a shading there in the Bay of Campeche as well as the western part of the Caribbean into the Gulf of Honduras. And there have been a couple of models, particularly the GFS, that has tried to hint at some kind of a blip, maybe from the Central American gyre there, that could whip something up and perhaps turn it up toward the Yucatan Channel, the Bay of Campeche, or perhaps over there in the western part of the Caribbean. But I want to tell you, this is normally where June systems would go ahead and develop anyway. So what I'm seeing with the Tropics Hazard Outlook and with some of the models that we've seen, really nothing unusual that we would see during the month of June. Let's talk a little bit about the water temperatures. Obviously, you all know that you have to have 80-degree water in order to sustain a tropical system or to get a tropical system to develop. Now, the numbers that you're seeing on this particular graphic are in Celsius. So anything that's over 26 and a half, so generally anything yellow, orange, red, pink, or brighter than that, you're warm enough to have tropical systems to be able to move over those waters because the surface temperatures are at 80 degrees or higher. Another thing we try to look at, though, is the tropical cyclone heat potential, which today that graphic seems to be unavailable, but that also measures how deep that 80-degree therm goes down below the surface of the water. The deeper that 80-degree water is, the more tropical cyclone heat potential you have. And when you have those kind of situations, and particularly in this area right in here, you get those deeper waters that go down to 80 degrees. So sometimes you can get a tropical system that might move over these extremely warm waters, but with high ocean heat content. And what you end up happening is you can go from a weak tropical system to a strong hurricane with those rapid intensification conditions if you get that kind of scenario. Now, as far as our water temperatures compared to normal this time of the year, the Gulf of Mexico, the Western Caribbean, and the Western Atlantic, all above normal, about 1 to 2 degrees above normal. But then you look at the central and eastern part of the Caribbean and then going out into the Atlantic, some of our tropical development areas actually seeing water slightly below normal. Now, there's nothing really that sticks out here as way above or way below normal, but this is kind of what you're going to see during the month of June. The second thing that tropical systems need to have to be able to develop is light wind shear. And wind shear is the wind speeds different from the surface or higher up in the atmosphere. And if you've got different speeds going in different directions, what happens is it can tear apart a developing tropical system. So when you have very high wind shear, which is represented here generally in that red and orange across the Gulf, eastern part of the Caribbean, and then going out here in the Atlantic, that's a pretty hostile environment for any tropical systems to try to develop in. And when you have that, it does tend to shear these things apart. I'm going to go a little bit more into the wind shear and how El Nino and La Nina kind of comes into play with that. Because I know a lot of you who follow along with the tropics, you know that a La Nina season means more tropical activity on the Atlantic side. And when you have El Nino, you have less. So that's those El Nino, La Nina is what affects shear and the trade winds. And I'll explain why you have more or less tropical systems depending on if you're in El Nino or La Nina. Saharan dust. I showed you the satellite imagery earlier with the Saharan dust, and you can see it's covering a large part of the Atlantic Ocean. That would also be an inhibiting factor for tropical systems to be able to develop. So as far as any development over the next several days, the GFS model is really the only one that's been trying to stir something up basically in this particular area right now with the latest model run. And you can see it there, right there. There's that low near the Yucatan and then maybe trying to work its way around the Bay of Campeche or the Yucatan Peninsula. But I will say the GFS model has been consistent in trying to develop something, but it's been very inconsistent on where. And as you can see, this latest one has something developing near the Yucatan, but in succeeding runs of the GFS, I've seen one here, I've seen it here, I've seen it here, I've seen one here. So there's really no consistency except for the GFS wants to try to develop a tropical system. Where and how strong is completely off the charts from model run to model run. Now, late last week, I will say the Euro did have a blip of something right about in here near the Yucatan and then possibly working its way up here toward the Florida Panhandle. That was only one run, and I've kind of looked back and I really don't see a whole lot with the Euro model from model run to model run. There's no consistency on anything tropical developing, and this latest model run that we have from earlier today also isn't showing anything over the next 10 days. The next global model is the Canadian model. And the reason we look at the global models first is because they go the farthest out. This gives us 10 to even 16 days worth of a future view. Now, of course, it all does change, especially when you get farther out, 13, 14, 15, 16 days out, you're going to have a lot of inconsistencies, but it's just kind of a little gauge of what we can see. And the Canadian model isn't showing anything either. And the Icon model, the final of our global models, might be showing some moisture increase there near the Central American coast getting into day 7, but it doesn't go quite out as far as the GFS, the Euro, and the Canadian. So I only got 7 days worth of data, and it does seem to be hinting at some moisture building, but it's not conclusive on if we're going to see anything develop in that particular area, as the GFS is suggesting. So right now, the GFS is the only thing that's suggesting anything. And from model run to model run, it's very inconsistent. So we can't really buy into the forecast as of now. So at this point, it just appears we're not going to be seeing anything tropical developing over at least the next week, perhaps to the next 10 days. But during the month of June, as I said, June, usually you see your development out here over the Gulf of Mexico, the Western Atlantic, and then sometimes down here in the Yucatan Channel. A lot of times it's a cold front that will come down and stall, and then you'll get a low pressure to develop along that. You also have the Central American Gyre, which is kind of a rotation of low pressure, and you get disturbances that will kind of rotate around that gyre, and occasionally you can get one that will develop here and then work its way over into the Gulf of Mexico. So those are really the two main scenarios of how you're going to get a tropical system during the month of June. Having one out here, having one out here is pretty unusual this early in the hurricane season. Not impossible, but it's pretty unusual. And as you look at the course of the year, you don't have a whole lot of action during the months of June and July. But once you start to get into August and cruise towards September the 10th, your activity really starts to ramp up. So June is still a good preparation month. July usually doesn't have a whole lot of tropical activity. So even though hurricane season has started, you still have plenty of time to get your supplies together and get yourself ready for hurricane season. And as hurricane season progresses, usually you have 1 or 2 during the months of June and July, but then August, September, you average about 4 each, and about 3 during the month of October and 1 during the month of November. So on any given year, the average is 14 named storms. I'll tell you, when I started in the business over 30 years ago, the average was 10. So that number has gone up. Same goes with hurricanes. We average about 7, with 3 of those becoming major hurricanes. A lot of times we don't get our first hurricane until the month of August, but of course last year we had Hurricane Beryl that not only became a hurricane, but became a major hurricane during the month of June. So that was a very early start to the season. Then the Saharan dust came in and choked things for a couple of months. And then as La Nina started to kick in a little bit, we started to ramp up on some of our activity there toward the end of 2024. So let's talk about El Nino and La Nina. Now, this is the ENSO model prediction. So this is the El Nino. This is the El Nino northern southern oscillation. And what this is it's a matter of warm water that's off the coast of South America, the west coast. It's in the Pacific. So if that water gets warmer than average, it's El Nino. If it gets cooler than average, it's La Nina. Now, the model predictions this year aren't very conclusive that we're going to have either one. You can see everything is right down the middle. This up here would be El Nino, and this down here would be La Nina, but everything's kind of fallen in the middle in the neutral zone. So that does actually make it a little bit harder to predict whether or not you're going to have an above average or a below average season. Now, I will say, because a neutral forecast is there going into the peak of the hurricane season, you also see a little bit of La Nina. That's the blue lines right there. So having an El Nino season doesn't look very likely. That's in the red. But a blue or a neutral, which you can see right here, is a lot more likely as we get into that August, September, October, and September, October, November, which is the part of the peak of the hurricane season. So even though we're expecting neutral conditions, there's a hint there's a little La Nina that could come in there, which is why some of the forecasts are slightly above normal, not majorly above normal like some of the early season forecasts were back in 2024. So when we have La Nina, we end up having more hurricanes in the Atlantic basin because we have weaker vertical wind shear. And we end up having fewer hurricanes on the Pacific side because of stronger vertical wind shear. And then when you have El Nino, you have the opposite. So if we were going into an El Nino year, we'd be a little more confident that we would have lesser named storms over the course of the hurricane season. But with La Nina and more of a neutral type of situation in place, kind of all bets are off. So even though the predictions are showing La Nina may start to kick in a little bit, some of our numbers for our hurricane season are a little bit higher because perhaps there would be a little less vertical wind shear. So why does vertical wind shear have an effect on tropical systems? Well, as these systems develop at the surface and they start to build and get higher and higher, one of the things that makes a system stronger is you have a vertical core. But when the core gets tilted by some of these stronger winds in the mid and upper levels, it doesn't develop quite as easily. So this could become a mature storm while this one down here is going to struggle. So when you have El Nino in place, you have a lot more vertical wind shear, which makes it harder for tropical systems to develop. When you have La Nina in place, you have less vertical wind shear, which makes it a lot easier for tropical systems to develop. So if you've got something that's weak, that looks like it's trying to develop, but it's got a lot of vertical wind shear, it's going to have a lot of problems. But once a tropical system is already fully formed, it can be influenced by vertical wind shear, some weakening, but once you already have a fully fledged tropical system, wind shear doesn't have quite as much of an effect on it. So the preseason forecasts, and Colorado State is going to be updating their forecast next week. I think it's on June 11th. Is when they're going to update. And they're predicting 17 named storms. So that is still above normal. I believe that's taking into consideration the warm water temperatures, the possibility we could see a little La Nina coming in toward the peak of the hurricane season. And then just because the last several years we've seen above normal activity anyway, I think they're kind of throwing that in there as well. But they're talking about 9 hurricanes and perhaps 4 major hurricanes. So that would be an above normal season. The NOAA forecast is really about the same, going with 13 to 19 named storms, which is pretty much right in the ballpark of Colorado State. It's also saying there's going to be a 60% chance that we'll see an above normal hurricane season, and it's not very likely we're going to see below normal. 30% chance we would see a near normal, but looks like their numbers of hurricanes and major hurricanes are about the same as what we are going to be seeing with what the Colorado State forecast has showed. And there are a lot of other preseason forecasts that are out there, and I encourage you to go out and read some of those forecasts. They're all available online. But these are kind of the 2 major ones that we look at. But even the other ones kind of fall in line with NOAA as well as Colorado State. So we could be facing a busy hurricane season once again. Fortunately, most of us didn't have to deal with a whole lot of tropical weather last year. We had one come in there on Terrebonne Parish's coast and kind of move off toward the northeast. Of course, we had stronger hurricanes that affected Florida. So many of you might actually have some of your supplies still left over from last year. And since we don't have any tropical systems, and it's only the 2nd day of June, this is what you can do right now to be hurricane ready by getting your batteries and your flashlights, water, and non-perishable foods. All of those items are on the store shelves right now, and nobody's fighting for them because we don't have any tropical systems out there. So that's why it's good to have all this stuff right away. No, make sure that you got a good first aid kit and that it has been replenished, that everything's in there. Make sure you know where your medicine, personal hygiene, and cleaners. Maybe get a little extra of the personal hygiene and cleaners. That way you have stuff to get ready for a hurricane season. IDs, insurance, important papers, and even better yet, take a picture of them and save them as digital. You can have a basic tool set, kid entertainment, and pet supplies. Now, a week before, let's say we've got something that's threatening and it looks like we're in the cone, but there still might be a shift. Go ahead and have your two plans. Are you going to stay at home and ride it out, or are you going to evacuate? At this point in time, you can start securing things outside of your homes by moving things inside. It's also a good time to top off the gas tanks and perhaps make a reservation that you can cancel the night before. So if we've got something that's threatening, a lot of other folks are going to be making reservations if they're deciding to evacuate. So a week out, if you can get that reservation made, and then it can be canceled if the tropical system decides to turn and go a different direction, that's your best move. And of course, alert all your family outside of the storm zone what your plan is going to be. Now, let's say the hurricane or tropical storm is imminent and we're within 3 days, 72 hours. That's when you can grab your last minute supplies, ice and food, stuff that would be a little bit more perishable that you don't have on hand at the beginning of the hurricane season. And if you are going to be evacuating, make sure you choose 2 different evacuation routes, maybe more. A lot of our apps, our navigation apps work great. They can get us out of traffic and find a different way. But if you can plan 2 different evacuation routes before you leave, then you'll be able to make your way out of the region probably a lot easier. And remember, Highway 90 and I-49 and I-10 are not the only evacuation routes. And it doesn't even have to have that evacuation route sign on there. If you can just find a route that gets you north and gets you out of the storm zone, that's what you can do. Check on your neighbors, make sure you know what their plan is, if they're staying home, if they're going to be leaving, and then go ahead and put your plan in action. So hopefully if you do all of these steps ahead of time, you'll be ready for anything that would come in and you'll be able to stay at home or evacuate, one or the other. And of course, you can get this all done right now, which is a lot easier because there aren't any other folks that are out there fighting for these supplies at this time. So hopefully everybody will get ready for hurricane season. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel and turn on those notifications. And I appreciate everyone joining me here for Let's Talk Tropics. And if you weren't able to make it live, this will be on the channel and you can watch it anytime you want. You can also hear my forecast, Big 102.1, Planet Radio 106.7, and Freedom 95.1. Don't forget, you can also see updates on Facebook and X. And also thanks to everyone who have subscribed to Acadiana Weather Today right here on YouTube. If you haven't, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you turn on the notifications, and that way you'll know when the next Let's Talk Tropics drops live here on YouTube. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Enjoy this beautiful Monday, and I will see you tomorrow morning for Acadiana Weather Today at 7 o'clock.